Hi, I'm Annie Fox for Family Confidential, Secrets of Successful Parenting. My guest today is book lover and children's librarian Michelle Coxford. Michelle and I will be talking about how to encourage your child to be a lifelong reader. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to Family Confidential.
Hi, Annie. Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here because, first of all, my parents moved to a town that had a children's library. I'm not talking about a children's section of a public library. There was a privately owned children's library in my town in a separate building. And I like to think maybe my mom knew that I was destined to be a writer, certainly an avid reader. So she chose this community because it had a children's library, and I loved being there. So as a children's librarian yourself, I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience of parents and kids walking into your children's library.
Well, we get a large range of children and families that come in. So we get people who come in on a regular basis, and they're very familiar faces. And we get a lot of people who come to the library who aren't normal users of the library. So it's quite a gamut. A lot of times during the school year, we get a lot of kids who come in with their parents because maybe the child's teacher has sent them to the library. So we're always open to welcoming new customers.
Yeah, and so here it is summertime, and I'm thinking, maybe the clientele changes and the hours obviously change when people come in. And so typically, let's talk about maybe a second grader who has been reading for a year or so and comes to the library with mom or dad. How can a librarian help them when they walk in maybe for the first time?
Well, what I like to do is oftentimes when a parent will approach me and ask for help selecting books or where they should go to get the books, I'll start by asking the child, what grade they're in, and if they're in second grade, I'll take them over to the reader section in our library. That's where we house a lot of the K through second grade books,
Mm-hmm.
and kids have quite a range of reading ability. So, and not knowing where that child might be, I mean, they could be in second grade and they could be reading at a kindergarten level.
Mm-hmm.
They could be second grade and reading at a fourth grade level. So I often will, on my way over to a section, I'll ask the child, so what have you read recently? Or what are your favorite types of books?
Ah.
And if a child can't really answer those questions, I tend to think maybe they're not real strong readers. Or I may ask the child, do you like to read? And if the child says no, then I'm thinking they probably aren't a very strong reader. I tend to try to talk to the child and not as much to the parent, but the parent inevitably will answer for the child. So I'll answer back to the parent, but I try to always steer the conversation to the child, because right at that moment, that is my customer. And
Okay, so yeah, I know parents are very well-meaning and they've brought the
of
child
course,
to the library and they want it to be a positive experience. I think this is one of the few places maybe that I can think of that the child's interests and abilities really should lead and guide the show versus say you go to a restaurant and the wait staff comes over and maybe asks um, Celeste, what would you like to eat? Or doesn't even bother asking Celeste, asked
yeah,
Celeste's mom and said, what will she have? And, it's like the kid's invisible. I love what you're saying about directing the conversation to the child. And a lot of kids just really aren't used to that happening with
right.
adults in the world. So here you have a friendly librarian who really wants to get to know you so that your needs as a reader, a young reader,
Yeah.
can be met. So if a kid gives you the indication that they're not really a strong reader, what do you do then?
Well, I typically will select a few different level of books from our shelves, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask the child, I'll open it up to the first page, and I
Ah,
ask the child, okay, I want you to tell me if this is too easy for you or if you think it might be too hard or just right.
Do you
And
ask
then
them? Do you ask them to actually read some of the book?
I do. And sometimes I don't want to embarrass a child, so I'll
Right.
kind of ask them maybe they could read it silently. Sometimes they'll look at me, and if they're really not sure, I tend to think that they are not a strong reader. And so maybe I'll get something a little bit easier until I find a text that seems to match the comfort level for the child. So sometimes I'll pick a book that I might think, well, this is about a second grade or maybe a first grade. There's like little short sentences, maybe very small little chapters per se, and it's only like a few pages long. And the child usually will tell me right off the bat, this is too easy. Okay, and then I'll find something a little bit harder. But if a child's really stumbling and they don't really understand, or they just kind of look at me with a blank face, I tend to even go even lower and then explain to the parent what it is I'm doing, because I'm also trying to teach the parent how to help choose appropriate text and books for their child.
Got it. So, how about a parent who tries to intervene at this point and says, "Oh, you know that word."
Oh, that happens quite a bit.
So it sounds like you're almost kind of asking the kid to do a test drive as you would, in a car dealership.
Absolutely.
So what happens if mom starts saying, "Oh, you know that word, sound it out," and it becomes a reading lesson? What do you do then?
I tend to kind of take a little bit of a step back because I don't want it to turn into that type of interaction with the child. That's because, and that's really not my job. And then what I do is I tend to select more books I think that would really appeal to the child and be appropriate for the child to read. And then I'll explain to mom, well, we do have these other types of books, and I might show him something that's a little bit easier, or maybe show him something that's a tad bit harder. And then say, you're welcome to check all these out and read with your child. I always stress that, because if a child is stumbling over words, then at least they have a parent that should be able to be there and help them sound out the word.
Yeah.
Instead of, too often I have parents who they don't want to read with their child. This is their time to read on their own. And that's not what I really want to have the parent walk away with. I want them to understand the importance of reading with their child, or having their child read to them.
So it sounds like you think it's a really good idea for parents and kids to read together, especially while they're young. Why is that important?
Well, I think one reason it's important is it's really good for the child's self-esteem. They're going to read aloud to their parent, and their parent is there to give feedback, hopefully positive.
Yeah. Good job.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. And I think it's really important for the child. Then if the child has trouble with words, you have a supportive parent who can help them through it, whether it's sounding it out or helping them break apart the word, or even explaining what the text means. I think a lot of reading comprehension, this is the key. When you have a parent maybe stop a child in the middle of a story and then say, okay, what just happened here? Can you explain what just happened here? That parent, knowingly or not, is teaching the child reading comprehension. And that is super, super key.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that it needs to be really safe for the child to say, "I don't know what that word means."
Absolutely.
And, it reminds me, my mom was an avid reader, and she taught me to read when I was 3.5. And, I'm very grateful for that. But I always felt that it wasn't quite safe for me to say, "What does that word mean?" She would say, "You don't know what that word means?" And the message being like, "Oh, better not ask those kind of questions again." So I think the idea of being a safe, encouraging parent, lots of praise, and you should be able to maybe read cues in your child's face, or even to understand, I get a sense there's a little confusion here, so I can ask, tell me what that word means. Do you know what that word means? Like
Right.
that in a really encouraging way. So parent as teacher reading coach, without a heavy hand, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
another thing, what I always try to remind parents as well is this K through second grade period is so crucial, and that it doesn't, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, now the child can start to read text on their own, then we're done reading to that child.
Ah.
That's no, it's still very important to read to your child, or, get a book out, whether it's a picture book that you could still, maybe the story's a little bit more advanced for that age group rather than a picture book that's geared towards the preschool age. They do have picture books that have concepts and themes that are appropriate for older kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I also encourage parents to start reading chapter books with their child. For example, one of the books that we read to our son was the Winnie the Pooh stories.
Oh, I love those.
Yes, and we read those. We would read a story a night, and he loved it. And it was
And
good.
it wasn't a book that he at that time could read by himself.
Right, absolutely. Right.
That's great. So this reading to a child, how early does it start?
Well, I say it starts as soon as possible. I say as soon as you bring that child home from the hospital,
Start
you
reading.
start reading. And with babies, I mean, you have a captive audience. They're not going to go anywhere. They're in your arms, and you can read aloud. And it can be really anything at that point. The baby just wants to hear your voice. And as time goes on, and as the baby starts, growing up, so to speak, the baby's gonna listen to the inflection of your voice, your pitch, and then once, probably in a few months old, they're gonna start being able to, see pictures better, whether it's black and white, or then you start adding some color. There's a lot of really, really fabulous board books out there for even the littlest of the kids. So
You use the term board books.
yes.
Those are the ones with the really thick pages that the kids can chew on?
Yes, because
Okay.
babies at that point, they're very oral, and they learn a lot of times they learn by putting things in their mouth. And if you can, at that age, they're not going to necessarily start understanding the word part, but they're going to understand that this is a book, and that you read from, in this direction, and this is how you turn the pages, and this is how you hold a book. And that's really where it all begins.
No, it's really interesting, because those board books, they're for chubby little hands, and you can turn the pages, you can carry them around, you can chew on them if you want. I've also seen books that go in the bathtub that are plastic books. I love this idea of book as toy,
Yes.
as companion that you can
Yes.
carry around with you. It's just a perfect way to indoctrinate, if you will, in a positive way, that books are things that we have with us, that give us pleasure, that open worlds to us, that stimulate our imagination.
Well, you hit it on the head with saying that books are like toys. I mean, if every family were to treat books like, and have them available to their children as they have their toys available to their children, then that's perfect. You could carry them in the car, carry it in your diaper bag, or in your backpack, or wherever you're going to have your child. Take a couple books with you, and it's having them available as often as you would have the toys is really key.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so now I'm thinking, okay, I love books. I love the physicality of books. I always have. Now we're going to segue into this high-tech world where people are more and more using readers of different kinds. And so print is coming through in a digital form. How do you feel one versus another? I understand reading is reading, but and I don't want to like prejudice your question by leading the witness, but I'm curious how you feel about young kids and the physicality of books versus digital, or doesn't it matter?
Well, that's a really good question, and one that I'm still learning a lot myself as a professional. I think I don't, I think that there's a big debate, I think, going on right now with how young is too young. And I think that I think it's important to start with the little ones to have the physicality of the book. And then as they start getting a little bit older, maybe start hitting preschool or 4 years old or so forth, then maybe start introducing some of the digital book and but have it with the parent. I think that a lot of times, and what I see at the library is parents come in to use a computer and they hand their child their phone or a reader, and then just have the kid is sitting there playing games on the reader and not having any interaction with the parent.
Yeah.
It's kind of, now they're using it like a little bit of a babysitting tool while the parent does what they need to do. I don't think that is a positive way of using e-readers. I think that if you're going to sit with your child and use an e-reader, then that's the better way to go, and talk about what you're clicking on or what you're reading or looking at together. I think parents just need to be careful about how they use them.
I think what you pointed out is so important. I mean, you picture this classic scene of story time before bedtime, and parent and child are cuddled up together, and there's a book between them, and they can talk about the story, and things come up for the kid, maybe about what happened during the day that's related to the characters' adventures. There's so many opportunities, and all of that, and you've got the physical closeness, and all of that really is lost if you just give a child a tablet consistently. Give a child a tablet and say, read yourself a story, or click this read to me button and someone else will read you a story, but there's no opportunity for that interaction. So I'm really glad to hear you encouraging parents, if they're going to use a digital kind of format to deliver stories to their kids, to be there with the kid. Yeah, really good stuff.
I think that's just key. That's just really, really important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, keep it in mind. It's a really great tip. So now I'm going to ask you, it's summertime. Before we wrap up, I'm a big proponent of story time. We have always read out loud. My husband and I still read out loud to each other at times. And our kids grew up to be not only avid readers, but both of them are writers. So I think there's something to be said about a love of books and reading, and you can't start too young, and that interaction's really special. So there is no cutoff date for it either. But now that it's summertime, I'd love for this, since we're talking about K through second grade, some really great books that parents and kids might enjoy together on a summer night. It stays lighter longer, and kids are maybe not saying, hey, it's not bedtime yet, it's not dark yet. Some stories that parents and kids could read together. Have some tips?
Sure. I have, well, when it comes to kids reading on their own to their parents, I think one of my favorite books, or series of books for children, are the Elephant and Piggy books by Mo Willems.
I don't know those. I'm going to write this down.
These are fabulous. And what I love about them is they really help children read with expression. There's a lot of questions and exclamation points. And when you first read with your child and you read these books with them, then you can talk about, well, why do I use this type of voice when I'm reading, this exclamation point? Because he's very excited.
Oh, good.
And I've actually read these books to when I've done class visits at the library for kindergarten and first grade. And a lot of times the parents or the teachers aren't really familiar with these books. So those are one that I think are really, really key. And it's fun then to have your child read those to you at night. And they're short, and so you can read several of them, in one sitting. But if you're, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I love concrete recommendations, and I love having kids pay attention to details like punctuation.
Yeah.
So there's a reason that what's on the page is there, and to make it dramatic and fun, great.
Yeah, they're fabulous. They're very, very fun. And another type of a reader that I think is really fun to read together for the younger, maybe kindergarten first, is Kevin Hankus has a new series of books about Penny, a mouse, and one of them is Penny and her marble. And what I thought was really an excellent story, because it deals with a period of development at that age where Penny takes a liking to, she finds a marble, but it's not her marble. And so it's one of those like, well, did you steal it, or are you borrowing it? And it's a really, really good lesson, because I think sometimes, your child is going to find themselves in a situation similar to what Penny found herself in. And those are really, really good books too. And I'm a huge Kevin Hickes fan, so that's an easy sell.
How about for 3rd through 5th grade?
Well, there's some really good books that are out there, like chapter books. I know my son really loves the Magic Treehouse books, and those have been around for a long time, and they're great stories and fun stories that you could read either a chapter a night, or you could read a chapter and maybe have your child read a chapter, and that's always fun to kind of
taking turns.
Absolutely. Like, so those are really fun.
Wonderful.
There's another book that I really like that I read with my son, because he just finished 2nd grade, and it's The Year of Billy Miller, which is also a Kevin Hickes book. And it's about a boy in 2nd grade and who has a younger sibling. So that was really interesting. And the parts of the story were divided up with his relationship with other characters, like his teacher, his mother, his father, and the sibling. So it was a really good book, and I thought it had really good little lessons in it. So that was a fun one to share.
Good. These are great recommendations, and I really hope that parents who are listening heed the call to maybe a less scheduled kind of day here during the summer, when your kids are not having to deal with homework and there are no lunches to pack maybe for the next day. And even if your schedule involves daycare during the day, maybe on weekends, when things are just a little less crowded and stressed, that you take time to read with your child, or as you say, have your child read to you. It's all good, and it's going to help them in so many different ways in their lives. Michelle, I want to really thank you for taking time to spend with us and sharing some of the librarian's view of what it's like for parents and kids to walk in, because most people don't really see the library maybe as the resource that it is for reluctant readers and for kids of all ages. So I really appreciate the work that you do. I want to thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
I'm Annie Fox for Family Confidential. To learn more about my work with tweens, teens, and parents, visit anniefox.com, where you can check out my book, Teaching Kids to Be Good People, Progressive Parenting for the 21st Century. And tune in next week when my guest will be Dr. Elizabeth J. Mayer. Dr. Mayer is the author of Supporting Transgender and Gender Creative Youth. She and I will be discussing back-to-school bullying prevention tips. Until next time, happy parenting!